Okay, so I have actually designed a new gauge swatch for Boo. I thought it'd be quite nice to sort of do something a little bit spooky. And you can also use this as like a mug rug or something. Maybe you'd probably, if you're going to stand something hot on it, you'd want to do it in like a cotton yarn or something. But this is obviously using the same yarn that I'm using for the main blanket. So it's Stylecraft Special Double Knit. Now for here I've got graphite and white. You'll have whatever colours you're using, obviously. So for the gauge swatch, we are just doing the 1 repeat wide, and that is 24 plus 5 stitches. Okay, so that's what I've got here. But I've actually written the pattern for the gauge swatch here as if you were repeating it across, because if you wanted to, you might actually like to get started on your blanket a bit early, say, or put this somewhere else. You can actually include this, just repeat it along and include it in your blanket. So what I thought I'd do, I'll show you what it looks like here if you are just making the gauge swatch with your, starting with 29 stitches. But I am actually gonna, for this tutorial, I'm just going to do an extra one so you can see how it works as a repeat. Okay, so I'll put that out of the way. So starting with our C1 colour, which is in my for my colourway, it's the white. So we start with a length of chains. Now I know some people like to do the chainless foundation double crochets, but for the purpose of my new border method, where you don't need to slip round the slip stitches, you actually have like a chain. We're inserting a chain at each end of every row, and you really need that right at the very start as well, so like on your chain level, where if you do the foundation double crochet you'll find that you haven't got a chain there. So I always recommend that you start with actually chains. Okay, now if you find that you tend to chain quite tightly, I'd recommend that you just go up a hook size just for the chain. Okay, I don't, mine is usually reasonably okay for the start, so I'm actually using a 3.75mm hook, but the pattern suggests that you use a 4mm. I just go slightly smaller now because I've noticed over time, as I've done more and more mosaic crochet, that my tension's probably got a little bit looser. So whichever hook that you would usually use for this yarn, go with that to start with. And then, as I said, we're going to start with a length of chains. So if you're just making the gauge swatch, you are going to be making 29 chains now. I am going to be adding an extra 24 onto that, so I can make the wider version, just to show you how it is if you want to repeat it across. So when I start my chains, I don't usually put a slip knot on the hook. I usually just do what I did there. Just twist the yarn around, just so you don't, it's easier. This will be like a bonus chain. So if I now pulled that tight, it would effectively be like a slip knot. I'm going to leave that loose. That just gives you an extra chain, just in case you've miscounted. You've got another one you can work into. Okay, so call that a loose slip knot. So now, say for the gauge swatch, you're going to be making 29 chains. So I'm going to do a few more than that. So there, to do the chain like so. So don't pull them too tight, but you don't want them too loose either. Just keep them nice and even. So when you've got your chains, which is 29 for the gauge swatch, or 53 if you do want to carry on with what I'm doing here and just do the extra one wide, and I'll see you when you've done that. Okay, so I have now got 53 chains, not including this initial loose one. So the idea is, if I've got my count right, I'll be able to pull that tight once I'm confident I've got the right number of stitches. Okay, so what you'll probably notice is I'm saying to fasten off at the end of this chain. Now, the only reason for doing that is if you wanted to use this as like a mug rug or something and you want to leave a little fringe, it's nice to have sort of an end, a loose end at each end. So you've got the fringe at each end. But if you prefer to just carry on and come back along the chain, you'll just need to do one extra one as a turning chain. So for the purpose of what I'm showing you here, I'm going to do that. Okay, that's actually, I think in the main pattern I say to do the extra chain there. So the stitch repeat is a multiple of 24 plus 5 stitches, but that would then be, if you're not going to cut at the end of the chain, you need that extra chain. So it'd actually be 24 plus 6 chains. Hopefully that makes sense. And I actually can't remember if I just added the extra chain or not. So I'm going to do it now anyway, because it won't matter if I've got too many at the other end. Okay, so we'll do that. So there's the turning chain. So now what we're going to do, I mentioned earlier about the border where we're going to have a chain at each end of every row. We're also, if you're not familiar with overlay mosaic crochet, you generally do an envelope border on that, which is basically 2 borders. So you'll work one on the right side, one on the wrong side of your blanket, and join them together at the end. So to do that, we are going to be working one border when we get along the bottom into one loop and the other into the other loop there, which means that when we do our starting or foundation row, we're going to be working into the back of the chain. Can you see you've got these sort of back bump, these sort of ridges on the back? So we're going to be working into those. So that's another reason for telling you not to do your chains too tight, because if you do them really tight, you can struggle to get your hook into there. Okay, so we missed this first chain because that's our turning chain, and then we've got a double crochet. Okay, so every row will start with a double crochet. Then the chain that I mentioned before. So then we're going to miss this next chain. So we always miss the chain there under our new chain. Okay, and then you're just going to work a row of double crochets, as I said. Whoops, hold on. So miss that one. Row of double crochets into that back bump like so. Okay, so 1, 2, so carry on like that until you have got, that'll be your multiple of 24. So if you're just doing the gauge swatch, you'll have 24 stitches and then one more, because we just need to even up our pattern. So between the spaces you are going to need 25 stitches, or if you're doing what I'm doing, 49. Okay, so that should take you to sort of 3 before the end. Okay, so I have now just double checked and I've now got 49 stitches after that initial chain there. Okay, that's just what I need. So that's 2 lots of 24 plus 1. Okay, so that's what you're going to have between your chains. So I'm now going to do another chain, and as before we're going to miss this one, and then there we go, work a double crochet in there, and so and tighten that up. If you were doing a much larger blanket or something, what you might want to do is actually just leave that for a little bit longer until you actually start creating the pattern, just as a double check. Okay, so that is row 1. Now I'm going to fasten off. Okay, so scissors, you're going to need your scissors nearby as you are doing overlay mosaic, because that is what we do. We cut the yarn at the end of every row because we're always working on the right side. So you're constantly working from right to left if you're right-handed, or left to right if you're left-handed. Okay, so for the main pattern, when you actually get started on that, I usually recommend you do another row in this same colour in your so this would be effectively a foundation row, and then row 1 would be a plain row, which would basically be double crochets into the back loop all the way along in the same colour. Just because when you're doing the border, it's nice, I think it's nice to just have that little extra bit of blanket to work with at the start, and I'll also add an extra one on at the end. Okay, but for the purpose of the gauge swatch, I'm not bothering them with that. I'm going to go straight to my contrast colour. Okay, but you say for the main blanket, what you would be doing is what I'm now going to show you here, but this would be like a row 1 That was the foundation row. This would then be row 1 in the same colour. Okay, hopefully I haven't confused you horribly. Okay, so apart from that very first row, I always start with a standing double crochet. So to do a standing double crochet, you start with a slip knot on your hook, however you do it. And I don't think what I do is technically a slip knot, but it works. So I've just done like that, effectively like that initial loose chain was, and then pull it. There we go. So you've got a knot on your hook. So what we then do, as I said, we go back to the beginning of our row, and you need to make sure you've got your chain the right way round. And you'll know it's the right way round because you'll be able to see the top loop sort of tilted towards you, whereas if it was the wrong way up, it looks like that. So you can't see, when you're holding it flat, you can't see the loops on the stitches. Okay, so that's upside down. That's the right way up and the right side. Okay, so I've got my slip knot, and as I said, what we do is we always go into this very first stitch, and for this one, there's only 2 stitches on the whole row which you'll be working under both loops. So I'm going to do that. So it's a standard double crochet under both loops. Then we have our chain. Okay, so we're then going to miss this chain, and then we are going to work just a row of double crochets, but only into this back loop. Okay, so we need to leave the front loops there. We need to then leave them free, because when we create our pattern, we're going to be dropping down, we're going to be using them on the next row. Okay, so for this row, for row 2 of your gauge swatch pattern, it is just double crochets into that back loop. All right, so if you do that all the way along, and I'll see you when you get to that next chain. Yeah, so I've now got to that last chain, and say I'm not going to show you the ends of the rows anymore because it's always going to end with one chain, miss that chain, and then I'll double crochet under both loops. So you have double crochet, a normal double crochet under both loops for the very first and very last stitch of each row, and in between, that'll be, if you're doing double crochets in between, they'll always be into the back loops. Okay, so cut that off. So that's row 2. So now we are going to start creating our pattern. So we're switching back to our C1 colour again. Remember, slip knot on the hook, and then as always, whoops, it's going to be a double crochet under both loops there. So by doing the slip knot, it's quite easy to see where your first stitch goes because it's right next to there. So by doing a standing stitch, I find that's easier to know exactly where you start, and it also helps that you've then got a chain. Okay, so it's always going to be starting with a double crochet under both loops, then a chain, miss the chain. So now we go straight into, and if you look at the written pattern, it's an F stitch. So what I've done, so I don't need to have separate UK and US terms in my patterns. I've sort of developed this universal sort of notation. So what you need to think about is whether you are going to be worked. So all of your double crochets, like I've just said, get worked into the back loop. So they will be a B. Okay, so that will be either a back loop double crochet for the UK terms, or a back loop single crochet if you generally prefer US terms, but in my patterns there, that will be called a B. So B for back loop double crochet. When you come to making your pattern, you're going to be working into the front loops 2 rows below, so that's F for front. So for UK terms, that's a treble. For US terms, that would be a double crochet. Okay, so we start with an F, so we're gonna remember to miss the chain, so we need to go straight into this loop here and work a treble. Okay, so that is before our repeat starts. If you're looking at the chart, you'll see the sort of repeat box starts, the line for that is right sort of here, and if you're looking at the written instructions, there's an asterisk there. Okay, and then our repeat is going to start with another F, another front loop treble. Okay, So where you see F, you're working into the front loops, and the stitches that get worked into the front loops are UK trebles. Okay, now we've got 8 B's, so that is back loop double crochets. Now what we've got to make sure we do is skip, so this is our chain, got to make sure we skip these 2 double crochets behind the trebles. Okay, so otherwise we'll end up with the wrong stitch count. So that's the chain which we've already skipped. These are the 2 stitches behind our treble, so we're going to skip those 2, and then we start here with a little run of 8 back loop double crochets. Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then we've got 5 front loop trebles. So if you hold it nice and flat, hopefully you'll be able to see. If you were doing another double crochet, it would be worked into there. So you go straight down, like your treble there. Okay, and if you're not sure, because sometimes it can look a little bit sort of wonky and you may not be sure if you've actually gone into the right loop, because we did 8 back loop double crochets there, you should have 8 spare front loops down, 2 rows down. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we know we've done that right. Okay, so now we've got, and so that was the 1 front loop treble, 1 F. We now need 4 more because there's a little run of 5 trebles there. 3, 4, 5. Okay, then we've got another 8 B's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll see I actually accidentally sort of went into that sort of 3rd loop there. I don't bother to do that. I know some people like, if you're working into a back loop, to also pick up that extra sort of 3rd loop there. I don't bother, because to be honest, the bit that you see mainly is the loop at the front, so you're not really going to help. That's not going to help much if you've gone into the back one, and that just slows me down. So just literally the back loop is fine. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And actually, talking about the loops, if you find when you're working, and that when you've done a treble, it's sort of, you're getting big gaps like that, sort of showing, what that generally means is probably 2 things. One, you are making your trebles a bit too tight, so they sort of squash down. And another thing is, you may be leaving your top loops a little loose. So what you need to do to keep these as neat as possible is to try and keep the top loops of your stitches all nice and even and not too big. So don't pull them really, really tight, but just so they're nice and even like so. So to do that, if you find you are getting those loops, when you're just making your stitches, just gently get into the habit, just gently tensioning that first part of your stitch just a little bit more than you usually do. It'll soon become second nature if you find you're doing that. So yeah, so rather than leaving it like that, just gently tension it so that it's not too big. Okay, so now when we come to do our front loop treble, say, make sure that's not too big. So we've got our run of 2, 4, 6, 8 back loop double crochets. So our repeat ends with 2 front loop trebles. Okay, 2. So if you're only making a gauge swatch, you will now be up to your chain at the end of the row. And what I'm going to do, because I'm carrying on, the next repeat then starts with 1 more front loop treble. So I'll just show you that. It's 1 more front loop treble, and then 8 back loop double crochets, and so on. Okay, so there we go. Like I say, for the gauge swatch, well, that is your repeat. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on and finish this row, and then I'll come back and I'll show you row 4. Okay, so there we have up to row 3. So row 4 again, using C2 again. So start with your standing double crochet in that first stitch and a chain, miss the chain. Right, so we now start with two back loop double crochets. Now you'll see that's the only thing you can do when you've got a treble on the row before, because there's no front loop available to work into because the treble's covering it up. So that's a little tip. If you ever find in a pattern that when you're reading the instructions it appears to be telling you to do a front loop treble when you got trebles already in the row below, you've probably miscounted. So it's worth checking that. I mean, obviously there could be a mistake in the pattern, but generally that will mean that you've miscounted somewhere. All right, so you can only work a double crochet, back loop double crochet, when you see a treble. So we've now got 5 front loop trebles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the body of our first cat. 2 back loop double crochets, and then 1 front loop treble again, which is going to be the start of his little tail. Okay, then we've got 5 back loop double crochets along here, because as I said before, when you see trebles that's the only thing you can do. 4, 5, and then we've got another cat which is facing the opposite way to the first one, so that's 1 treble, 2 back loop doubles, and then say make sure you're missing your 2 front loops there, then you've got 5 front loop trebles. Okay, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to end our repeat, or if you're doing the gauge swatch, end your row with 2 back loop double crochets. And like I say, if you're doing the gauge swatch, you will now have your chain and 1 double crochet in the end. Okay, so that is row 4. So I'm going to carry on and complete that, and I'm going to come back and show you row 5. Okay, so for row 5, back to C1 again. We're obviously going to start with our standing double crochet and a chain, as we always do. So then we have got 1 front loop treble before our repeat starts. Okay, and then the repeat starts with 7 back loop double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then 1 front loop treble, 2 back loop double crochets, and then we're gonna have 3 front loop trebles. So this is now between our little cats. 3, then 2 back loop double crochets, 1 front loop treble, whoops, 1 front loop treble, 7 back loop doubles, 5, 6, 7, and our repeat ends with 1 front loop treble, or as I've said before, if you're doing the gauge swatch, you will now have got to your chain at the end of the row. Okay, so again, I'm going to repeat this row and I'll come back and we'll run through row 6 together. Okay, so now I just got started on row 6 with the edge stitch and then that chain, and then we have 1 back loop double crochet before we start our repeat. Then we have 7 front loop trebles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2 back loop double crochets, and 1 front loop treble. There we go, so the little cat is starting to take shape. Then we've got 3 back loop double crochets, and so we're now going to sort of do what we've just done for this cat in reverse order. So that's 1 front loop treble, 2 back loop doubles, then 7 trebles, whoops, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we end the repeat with 1 back loop double crochet. So obviously if you're just doing the gauge swatch width, you'll now be up to that chain at the end. Okay, so I'm now just going to carry on and complete my row 6, and I'll come back and show you row 7. Okay, so I've now just got started on row 7 with the edge stitch, chain, and then there's the front loop treble before we actually start our repeat. Okay, so then we start with 7 back loop double crochets, six, 7, 2 front loop trebles. Oh, try again, and all of the yarn, 2 back loop double crochets, then 1 front loop treble. So that's now between the 2 little cats. So we're now going to do this in reverse order. So that's 2 back loop double crochets, 2 front loop trebles, 7 back loop doubles, 5, 6, 7, and our repeat ends with 1 front loop treble. So obviously if you're doing the gauge swatch, that is, you'll now be up to that chain at the end. So I'm now going to carry on, finish my row here. Okay, I've now just got started on row 8 with the edge stitch, chain, and a back loop double crochet before we start our repeat. So for our repeat, we've now got 1 more back loop double crochet, then 5 front loop trebles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we've got 11 back loop double crochets, 2, 3, 10, 11, 5 back front loop trebles, 4, 5, and then our repeat ends with 2 back loop double crochets. Okay, so obviously you'll now, if you're doing the gauge swatch, you'll now be up to your chain at the end. So I'll carry on and complete this, and I will see you for... Actually, I think you can probably do row 9 yourself. That's quite a nice straightforward one. It's basically just going along, working a front loop treble where we did our back loop double crochets before, and vice versa. Okay, so you'll have 2 front loop trebles here, so 1 before the repeat, then 1 to start the actual repeat, 5 back loop double crochets, then your run of 11 front loop trebles, and so on. So carry on and do that, and I will see you for row 10. Okay, so just got started on row 10 with the edge stitch, chain, and there's a back loop double crochet before we start our repeat. So this is another nice straightforward one. So we just now have 2 back loop double crochets, then 3 front loop trebles. So we're up to like the cat's neck now. 3, 13 back loop double crochets. 12, 13, then 3 front loop trebles. 2, 3, and we're going to end our repeat with 3 back loop double crochets. There we go. So carry on, complete that, or indeed if you are at the end, obviously you've got your chain and your double crochet then, and then if you want to do row 11 on your own, and I'll come back and we'll do row 12 together. Okay, so this is what it looks like after row 11. Row 12, so you can see the cats are now starting to take shape, and we've just left these little spaces here, which is going to be the bottom of the little coffins that go between the cats. So what I've now done, I've started with the edge stitch, the chain, and then there's 1 back loop double crochet before our repeat starts. Okay, so then we have 1 more back loop double crochet, and then you should see we've got some new a new symbol in the chart. There's some square brackets. So whenever you see square brackets in any of my patterns, what that means is whatever is inside those square brackets, you do however many times it tells you to afterwards. So this has got 1F, 1B twice. Okay, so that's what we're now going to do. 1F, 1B once, and again 1F, 1B, so that's twice. Then we've got another F there, so that's now the cat's head with these little starry eyes. Okay, so then we've got 4 back loop double crochets, or indeed B's as it would be in the written instructions. 3 front loop trebles. Whoops. 2, 3, 4 back loop double crochets. Then we've got 1F, 1B twice again, so 1, 1, 2, 2, and then another F to complete the little cat's head there. And then our repeat ends with 2 more back loop double crochets. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on and complete that. So if you want to do row 13 by yourself, and I'll come back and we'll do row 14 together. So here we are after row 13. So the cats are almost finished now. We're just going to add their ears on this next row. So I've got started as usual with the edge stitch chain and a back loop double crochet before we start our repeat. So now row 14, we have another back loop double crochet. And then we've got more square brackets. So that's 1 front loop treble and 3 back loop double crochets twice. 2, 3, so that's once, 1 front, 3 back is twice. Then we've got 5 front loop trebles, 4, 5. Then we've got more square brackets, so that's 3 back loop double crochets and 1 front loop treble twice. Okay, so that's 1 and another 3 back and 1 front, and then I'll repeat ends with 2 more back loop double crochets. So you're all ready to start again with 1 back loop double crochet, unless of course you're doing the gauge swatch, in which case you will now be up to your chain at the end. Okay, so carry on and do row 15 yourself, and I'll come back and we'll do row 16 together. Okay, so this is what we're looking at after row 15. So I've just got started on row 16 with the edge stitch chain and a back loop double crochet before we start the repeat. Now we've got a nice little run, this nice simple one again really. So we've got 9 back loop double crochets. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we have 2 front loop trebles, 1 back loop double, 2 trebles, then I'm going to end the repeat with 10 back loop double crochets. So that will take you to your chain at the end of the row if you're doing the gauge swatch. So carry on with that. Do row 17 yourself, and I'll then come back and we will do row 18 together. Okay, so I've now just got started here on row 18 with the usual edge stitch chain and then the back loop double crochet. That's before our repeat. So now start the repeat with 3 more back loop double crochets, 2, 3, 1 front loop treble, then we've got 4 back loop double crochets, 3, 4, 3 front loop trebles, 1 double, 3 trebles, then 4 double crochets again, 1 front loop treble, and we're going to end with another 4 back loop double crochets. Okay, so we're getting there now. So carry on, complete that row, do row 19, and I will see you for row 20. Okay, so we're getting there now. I've just now completed row 19 and got started on row 20 with the usual bits and pieces before the repeat. So our repeat for row 20 starts with 3 back loop double crochets, 2, 3, 1 front loop treble, then 4 double crochets, 2 trebles, then we've got 3 doubles, and another 2 trebles. So this is the cross on the coffin. 4 back loop double crochets, and then we've got 1 front loop treble, and this is going to be another cross, but these are the ones that are above the cat's heads. Okay, and then our repeat ends, or indeed the gauge swatch basically ends with 4 back loop double crochets. And of course, if you are doing the gauge swatch, that will then take you up to that chain at the end of the row. Okay, so carry on and complete that, and do row 21 yourself, and I will come back and do row 22 with you. Okay, so almost done now, just 2 more rows to do. So row 22, Obviously I've already got started the usual bits and pieces before the repeat, and then our repeat is 3 back loop double crochets, 1 front loop treble, so that's that cross done. Then we've got 5 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 front loop trebles, 1 back loop double, and another 2 trebles. So that's the little coffin completed. Okay, then we've got 5 double crochets again, 5, 1 treble, and then our repeat ends with 4 double crochets. So obviously if you're doing the gauge swatch, you will now be at that last space, so you can just finish that off. Okay, so carry on and complete that, and then once you've done row 23, it will look, ta-da, like this. Okay, obviously for mine I'll have an extra little section of cats. Okay, so that's your completed gauge swatch. Okay, so I've just run off and picked up my ruler, so we can now check the size of our gauge swatch. So rather than telling you it's so many stitches to 10 centimeters, I thought, to be honest, it might be easier to just measure the entire gauge swatch, because I know sometimes people get a little confused. So if we now just plonk that there, can you see? That's at the starting end and the end, so that now is 15 centimeters, not straight, 15 centimeters wide. It may be fractionally less, but basically 15 centimeters wide. And that's using the special DK. And if we go that way, we've got 13 centimeters. So if you were using the Recreate, then I found that mine was just slightly narrower, but actually about the same length. So it's not a massive amount in it. You'll probably just find that I think this is just maybe a centimeter less, maybe not even quite that. Okay. So so this is a nice little sort of free gauge swatch come extra pattern that you can use for Halloween. And also if you buy Boo, I've actually included in that a couple of bonus chats as well, some skeletons. There's sort of skeletons standing up and some sort of dancing, which I didn't come up with until after I'd made my sample and sent the pattern out to testing. So I haven't had time to write all of that up, but what I have done, so you don't miss out, is just drop those in, so you'll get them as a little bonus pattern with your, if you purchase the cowl. So if you purchase Boo, my Halloween cowl, you'll not only get this gauge swatch in addition to what's in the actual blanket, but you'll also get 2 little skeleton charts. So.